Gunpowder and shattered crystal choked the air inside the ruined VIP room of Rinaldi's Prime. 4 men in tailored suits leveled their suppressors at the head of the city's most feared syndicate leader. He was out of bullets, wounded in the shoulder, and waiting for the inevitable end. Nobody noticed the girl trembling behind the mahogany serving cart. Arrogant assassins always assumed a waitress in a cheap apron was invisible, just another piece of the scenery. They were dead wrong. As the executioner's finger tightened on the trigger, she lunged without a single scream. She simply scooped the heavy Sig Sauer off the floor, planted her feet, and fired the shot that would ignite a citywide war. The neon sign of Rinaldi's Prime buzzed with a low, electrical hum, casting a blood-red glow over the rain-slicked pavement of Rush Street in downtown Chicago. Inside, the atmosphere was a thick, intoxicating blend of roasted garlic, expensive cigars, and the subtle, sharp scent of old money. Cora Mitchell adjusted the strap of her black apron, suppressing a sigh as a dull ache throbbed in the arches of her feet. It was 11:15 on a Tuesday night, hour 14 of a double shift she had begged the manager, a sweaty man named Tomas, to give her. She needed the overtime. Her younger brother, Leo, was sitting in a bed at Northwestern Memorial Hospital with a failing kidney and a medical debt that had just crested $42,000. Exhaustion wasn't a luxury Cora could afford. Table 4 needs their check, and the VIP room just called for another bottle of the 15 Barolo, Tomas hissed, materializing beside her at the wait station. He looked exceptionally pale, dabbing at his forehead with a crumpled napkin. Cora frowned. Sarah usually handles the Capri room. She knows their preferences. Sarah is hyperventilating in the walk-in cooler, Tomas said, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. He's here, Cora. Victor Moretti is in the Capri room, and I am not going in there. Just bring the wine, pour it, and get out. Don't look him in the eye for too long. Cora took the dusty, incredibly expensive bottle of red wine from Tomas's trembling hands. She knew the name Victor Moretti. Everyone in Chicago who read a newspaper or watched the late-night local broadcasts knew it. Officially, he was the CEO of Moretti Logistics, a massive shipping conglomerate. Unofficially, he was the ruthless architect of the city's most powerful crime syndicate, having violently taken the reins 3 years ago after his father's sudden heart attack. Walking toward the heavy oak doors of the private Capri room in the back of the restaurant, Cora felt a strange sense of calm. She had grown up in Gary, Indiana, raised by a disgraced former Marine who drank away his pension. She was intimately familiar with terrifying men. Moretti was just a richer version of the ghosts she had already survived. She knocked twice, a soft, polite rhythm, before pushing the heavy door open. The Capri room was dimly lit, illuminated only by brass wall sconces and a crystal chandelier that hung low over a circular mahogany table. 3 men sat in the room, but only one commanded the space. Victor Moretti sat at the head of the table. He didn't look like the caricatures of mob bosses she had seen in movies. There was no gaudy jewelry, no cheap tracksuits. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit that clung to his broad shoulders. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his jawline was sharp, covered in a shadow of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that struck her a piercing, cold storm gray that seemed to catalog every detail of the room in a fraction of a second. He was terrifyingly handsome, but beneath the polished exterior lay an aura of coiled violence. Beside him sat 2 massive men, his bodyguards, Paulie and Silas, whose cheap, off-the-rack suits bulged suspiciously at the armpits. "The 2015 Barolo gentleman," Cora said, her voice steady and professional. She produced her corkscrew, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She didn't shake, she didn't falter. Victor watched her intently as she expertly uncorked the bottle and poured a small tasting measure into his glass. He swirled the dark red liquid, took a slow sip, and nodded. "Perfect," Victor said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that sent a strange, involuntary shiver down Cora's spine. "You have a steady hand. The last girl practically threw the bottle at us." "I find it's better for everyone if the wine stays in the glass, Mr. Moretti," Cora replied neutrally, stepping around the table to fill the other glasses. One of the bodyguards, Silas, let out a short, grating laugh. "She got a mouth on her." "Boss." Victor didn't laugh. His gray eyes stayed locked on Cora. "I like competence. It's rare. What's your name?" "Cora." "Thank you, Cora. That will be all." She offered a polite nod, placed the bottle on the table, and retreated. As she pulled the heavy door shut, she felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She had survived her first encounter with Chicago's underworld king. Returning to the main dining floor, Cora noticed the restaurant had emptied out significantly. Only a few stragglers remained at the front tables. But at the bar, a new group had arrived. 4 men in heavy, dark overcoats. They weren't drinking. They weren't looking at the menus. Their eyes were fixed entirely on the hallway leading to the Capri room. Cora paused by the espresso machine, her instincts flaring. Growing up with an unpredictable, violent father had given her an acute sixth sense for danger. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, like the atmospheric drop right before a massive thunderstorm. She watched as one of the men at the bar subtly reached into his coat, adjusting something heavy. She needed to warn Tomas to call security. But before she could take a single step, the men moved. The transition from a quiet, upscale dining experience to absolute chaos happened in the span of 3 heartbeats. Cora had just grabbed a tray of empty dessert plates to bring back to the kitchen, intending to take the hallway that bypassed the Capri room, when the 4 men at the bar stood up in unison. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized military precision. They didn't shout. They didn't draw attention to themselves. As Cora reached the intersection of the hallway, right outside the heavy oak doors of the private room, the lead man, a towering figure with a jagged scar running from his ear to his collarbone, kicked the doors inward with a deafening crash. Cora froze, flattening herself against the wall behind a massive, dark wood-serving credenza just outside the doorway. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside the room, the reaction was instantaneous, but the attackers had the element of supreme surprise. The distinct, terrifying pff of suppressed automatic weapons filled the air. "Contact!" Silas roared, diving across the table. He managed to draw his weapon, but a 3-round burst caught him square in the chest. He crashed back into a wine rack, bringing hundreds of expensive bottles shattering down around him in a cascade of red glass and alcohol. Paulie barely cleared his holster before the scarred man shot him cleanly in the head. The bodyguard slumped over the table, his blood mixing with the spilled Barolo. Cora crouched tighter behind the credenza, her hands clamped over her mouth to muffle the scream clawing at her throat. The smell of copper, spilled wine, and the sharp, sulfuric tang of cordite flooded her senses. It was happening. A full-scale mob hit, right in front of her. Victor Moretti, however, was not an easy man to kill. In the fraction of a second it took the gunman to dispatch his guards, Victor had vaulted backward, kicking the massive mahogany dining table upward. It acted as a temporary barricade, absorbing a hail of suppressed gunfire that splintered the expensive wood into 1,000 flying shards. From behind the overturned table, Victor returned fire. The concussive, unsuppressed bang-bang-bang of his handgun was deafening in the enclosed space. He was fast, precise, and entirely devoid of panic. One of the hitmen in the doorway took a round to the shoulder and spun backward into the hallway, collapsing just a few feet away from where Cora was hiding. But it was 4 against 1, and Victor was hopelessly pinned. "Flank him!" the scarred leader shouted, his thick Eastern European accent cutting through the ringing in Cora's ears. "He's trapped!" Cora peeked through the small gap between the credenza and the wall. She could see Victor crouched behind the shattered table. His charcoal suit was ruined, a dark, spreading stain blooming across his left shoulder. He was bleeding heavily. Victor popped up to fire another shot, but a barrage of bullets forced him back down. As he dropped, his left arm gave out, and his weapon, a sleek, custom-gripped Sig Sauer, slipped from his grasp. The gun hit the polished hardwood floor and slid. It skittered out of the Capri room, sliding across the threshold and spinning into the hallway. It came to a dead stop exactly 3 inches from Cora's sensible, black, non-slip work shoes. Inside the room, the gunfire paused. The assassins realized Victor had lost his weapon. The prey was cornered. "It's over, Moretti," the scarred man said, his voice dripping with dark satisfaction as he stepped slowly into the room, kicking the debris aside. "Carmine sends his regards." Victor leaned against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes darted around the room, desperately looking for an out that wasn't there. He was out of reach of his ankle holster. He was staring death in the face, and he knew it. Outside the room, behind the credenza, Cora looked down at the gun by her foot. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her mind screamed at her to run, to scramble down the hallway, slip out the kitchen service door, and disappear into the rainy Chicago night. This wasn't her world. This wasn't her fight. If she ran right now, they probably wouldn't even notice her. But as she looked at the gun, a memory flashed unbidden in her mind. She was 12 years old, standing in a freezing, muddy quarry in Gary. Her father, smelling of cheap bourbon and cigarettes, was standing behind her, adjusting her grip on a heavy pistol. "The world doesn't care if you're scared, Cor," his gravelly voice echoed in her memory. "The world only respects action. You see a threat, you breathe out, and you pull. Don't think. Act." Cora looked back into the room. The scarred man was raising his suppressed weapon, aiming it directly at the space between Victor Moretti's eyes. Victor didn't flinch. He just glared back, refusing to beg. Cora took a breath. She let it out. And she moved. Cora didn't just pick up the gun. Her hands moved with a mechanical, inherited muscle memory she hadn't utilized in over a decade. She scooped the heavy Sig Sauer from the floor. It was warm from having just been fired, the metal grip fitting perfectly into her palms. She checked the slide. It wasn't locked back. There was still a round in the chamber. She stood up from behind the credenza, stepping squarely into the doorway of the Capri room. The 3 remaining assassins were entirely focused on Victor. They had completely dismissed the perimeter, arrogant in their imminent victory. Victor, leaning against the far wall, saw her first. For a fraction of a second, the cold, stoic mask of the Mafia boss cracked. His storm-gray eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock as he saw the waitress in the black apron standing in the doorway, perfectly assuming an isosceles shooting stance. Cora didn't hesitate. She didn't shout a warning. She simply leveled the sights onto the center mass of the scarred leader. She squeezed the trigger. The deafening crack of the unsuppressed Sig shattered the tense quiet of the room. The scarred leader jerked violently forward as the bullet tore through his spine, his suppressed weapon discharging harmlessly into the floor as he collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. Time seemed to dilate, stretching into an agonizing crawl. The remaining 2 gunmen whipped around, their faces twisting in confusion and horror. They couldn't process what they were seeing. A waitress, a civilian. She had just dropped their deadliest enforcer. Cora didn't freeze. The recoil snapped her arms back, but she rode it, immediately reacquiring her target. Her father's drunken, slurred lectures played in her mind like a tactical manual. Front sight focus. Smooth trigger pull. She fired again. Bang! The second gunman took a hollow point round to the thigh. The impact shattered his femur, spinning him violently into the remains of the shattered dining table. He shrieked, dropping his gun as he fell to the floor, writhing in agony. The third and final gunman, finally breaking from his shock, swung his weapon toward Cora. But the distraction was all Victor Moretti needed. With the gunman's attention fractured, Victor pushed off the wall with his good arm. He lunged forward, his right hand diving to his ankle. In one fluid, brutal motion, he drew a small, silver backup revolver and fired 2 shots into the chest of the third gunman before the man could pull the trigger on Cora. The third assassin fell backward, dead before he hit the ground. Silence slammed back into the room, heavy and absolute, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded man on the floor and the harsh, ragged sound of Cora's own breathing. She stood frozen in the doorway, the heavy gun still pointed forward, her knuckles white. The acrid smoke of burnt gunpowder stung her eyes. The adrenaline that had propelled her was suddenly abandoning her system, leaving behind a cold, terrifying void. Her knees felt like water. She slowly lowered the gun, staring at the carnage she had just helped create. Blood was everywhere. Victor pushed himself up from the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He kicked the gun away from the screaming man on the ground, then turned slowly to look at Cora. He stared at her as if she were an alien species that had just materialized in his private dining room. His eyes trailed from her sensible shoes, up the blood-spattered black apron, to the steady grip she still maintained on his favorite firearm. "Who the hell are you?" Victor rasped, his voice rough, stripped of its previous polished veneer. Cora blinked, the reality of the situation crashing down on her like a physical weight. She had just shot 2 men. She had just intervened in a Mafia assassination. I'm your waitress," Cora stammered, her voice shaking now that the immediate threat was gone. She looked down at the gun in her hand, suddenly disgusted by it, and held it out to him by the grip. "You dropped this." Victor didn't take it. Instead, he reached into his ruined suit jacket with his good hand, pulling out a burner phone. He dialed a single number, holding it to his ear while he continued to stare at her. "Cleaners to Rinaldi's. Now." Carmine made a move. "Polly and Silas are gone. I'm hit, but mobile. Bring the armored SUV to the alleyway in exactly 2 minutes." He barked into the phone, then hung up. In the distance, the faint, wailing sound of police sirens began to echo through the Chicago streets. "We need to go," Victor said, moving toward the service doors at the back of the room. "We?" Cora took a step back, her eyes wide. No, I'm staying here. I'm calling the police." "It was self-defense. They were going to kill you, and then they would have killed me. I'm a witness." Victor stopped. He turned back to her, stepping close enough that she could smell the copper of his blood mixed with his expensive cologne. His gray eyes were intense, devoid of any warmth, but lacking malice toward her. "Listen to me very carefully, Cora," he said, his voice a low, urgent hum. "The cops in this district are on Carmine DeLucci's payroll. If the police find you here, they will take your statement, put you in a holding cell, and you will be found hanging by your bedsheets before sunrise." Cora felt the blood drain from her face. "You're lying." "I have no reason to lie to the woman who just saved my life," Victor said, his jaw tightening in pain as he adjusted his grip on his wounded shoulder. "You didn't just shoot some street thugs. You shot Carmine's top enforcer. When they find out a waitress did this, they won't just kill you. They'll find everyone you care about and kill them too, just to make a point." Cora thought of Leo, lying vulnerable in a hospital bed just 3 miles away. A sickening wave of nausea washed over her. The sirens were getting louder, closer. They had less than a minute. "You have 2 choices," Victor said, stepping into the back hallway that led to the kitchen and the alleyway beyond. "You stay here, trust the Chicago PD, and hope I'm wrong. Or you come with me, right now, and I make sure you live to see tomorrow." Cora looked at the dead men on the floor. She looked at the blood on her apron. The life she had known 10 minutes ago, the grueling shifts, the mountain of medical debt, the anonymity of being just another server in a busy city was gone forever, shattered like the Barolo bottles on the floor. She gripped the Sig Sauer a little tighter, swallowed the lump of terror in her throat, and ran after him into the dark. The kitchen of Rinaldi's Prime was a ghost town. Half-prepped salads and steaks abandoned on the grill filled the air with the smell of burning meat, a sharp contrast to the metallic tang of blood that clung to Cora's clothes. She followed Victor through the swinging doors, her non-slip shoes squeaking frantically against the grease-stained tiles. In the corner, near the walk-in freezer, Tomas was curled into a tight ball, his hands clamped over his ears, sobbing uncontrollably. He didn't even look up as the city's most dangerous man and his newest, unlikeliest shooter sprinted past him. Victor slammed his uninjured shoulder against the heavy steel emergency exit. The door burst open, spilling them out into the freezing, torrential Chicago downpour. The alleyway was pitch black, illuminated only by the frantic strobe of police cruisers gathering at the front of the restaurant on Rush Street. The sirens were deafening now, echoing off the brick walls like a physical force. Cora's lungs burned. The heavy Sig Sauer was still gripped in her right hand, her finger rigidly indexed along the slide, just as her father had taught her. The freezing rain plastered her hair to her face, washing the warmth of the adrenaline from her veins and replacing it with a bone-deep, terrifying chill. "Here," Victor grunted, leaning heavily against a rusted dumpster. His breathing was shallow, his charcoal suit jacket completely saturated with dark blood. Before Cora could ask what they were waiting for, the blinding glare of LED headlights washed over the alley. A massive, matte black armored Cadillac Escalade tore around the corner, its tires hydroplaning for a fraction of a second before finding traction and screeching to a halt inches from where they stood. The rear passenger door flew open. A man in a tactical turtleneck, carrying an assault rifle, stepped out. He took one look at Victor, then swung his gaze to Cora, his weapon immediately raising. "Stand down, Dominic," Victor barked, his voice ragged but commanding. "She's with me." Dominic's eyes darted to the gun in Cora's hand, his brow furrowing in profound confusion, but he lowered his rifle. "Boss, you're hit! We need to move. CPD is locking down a 3-block radius." "Get in," Victor ordered Cora, gesturing to the cavernous interior of the SUV. Cora hesitated. Looking into the back of the armored vehicle felt like looking into the mouth of a shark. She was a civilian. She was a server who needed to be at Northwestern Memorial Hospital by 8 a.m. to sign consent forms for Leo's dialysis. If she got into this car, she was officially crossing a threshold she could never walk back across. "If they catch you out here with my gun, you go to prison for murder," Victor said, reading her hesitation. "If Carmine's men find you, you go in the ground. Get in the car, Cora." She threw the Sig Sauer onto the leather seat and climbed in. Victor followed, groaning in pain as Dominic slammed the heavy, bulletproof door shut. The world outside the rain, the sirens, the flashing lights was instantly muted, replaced by the deep, powerful hum of the Escalade's engine as it tore out of the alley. Inside the cabin, the tension was suffocating. Dominic threw a first aid kit into the back before climbing into the driver's seat and hitting the gas. "Take us to the Lakeshore penthouse," Victor instructed, leaning his head back against the headrest, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Call Dr. Harrison. Tell him I need a patch job, no questions." "Paulie and Silas?" Dominic asked, his eyes meeting Victor's in the rearview mirror. "Gone," Victor replied flatly. "Carmine sent 4 shooters. Suppressed. They hit the Capri room." Dominic swore viciously under his breath, taking a corner so fast Cora was thrown against the door panel. "How did you get out?" "You didn't have your piece." Victor slowly turned his head to look at Cora. She was huddled in the corner of the spacious seat, her arms wrapped around her knees, shivering uncontrollably. The blood on her apron was drying, turning a dark, rusty brown. "The waitress fired back," Victor said, his voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and deep, begrudging respect. "Dropped the lead shooter with my SIG. Clipped the second, gave me time to draw the backup." Dominic whipped his head around to stare at her. "You're kidding me." "Keep your eyes on the road," Victor snapped. He turned his attention back to Cora. His gray eyes were calculating, studying her as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. "You handle recoil better than half my enforcers. Who taught you to shoot?" "My father," Cora whispered, her teeth chattering. "He was a Marine, force recon. He drank a lot, thought the world was ending, made me practice at the quarry. He did me a massive favor," Victor said, wincing as a fresh wave of pain washed over him. He reached over with his good hand, pulling a heavy cashmere blanket from a compartment and tossing it to her. "Wrap up. You're going into shock." Cora pulled the blanket around her shoulders, the expensive material feeling alien against her cheap uniform. "I can't stay with you. I have a brother. Leo. He's at Northwestern Memorial. He has renal failure. If I'm not there tomorrow morning—" Her voice broke, a sob finally fighting its way out of her throat. "He's just a kid. I'm all he has." Victor's expression shifted. The cold, calculating Mafia boss disappeared for a fraction of a second, replaced by something resembling empathy. He pulled his burner phone from his pocket and tossed it onto the center console. "Dominic," Victor said quietly, "call Arthur. Have him send a 4-man detail to Northwestern Memorial immediately. They are to sit outside the room of a—" He looked at Cora. "Leo Mitchell," she provided, her voice trembling. "Leo Mitchell. Room number? Room 412. West Wing. Have them secure the floor," Victor commanded. "Nobody goes in or out without Arthur's clearance. If Carmine's people try to use the kid as leverage, I want them put down in the hallway." Cora stared at him, stunned. You're doing that for me?" Victor closed his eyes, his breathing growing heavier as the blood loss took its toll. "You saved my life, Cora Mitchell. In my world, a debt of blood is absolute. Your brother is under the protection of the Moretti family now. Nobody touches him." Before Cora could process the magnitude of that statement, Victor's eyes rolled back and he slumped sideways against the bulletproof glass, unconscious. Cora awoke to the smell of freshly brewed espresso and the soft, rhythmic beeping of a medical monitor. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was lying in a massive, king-sized bed adorned with charcoal gray silk sheets. The room was expansive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and the churning, gray waters of Lake Michigan. She looked down. Someone had removed her blood-stained uniform and dressed her in an oversized, incredibly soft white t-shirt. Panic flared for a second, but then she noticed a set of neatly folded clothes on an armchair nearby: jeans, a sweater, and fresh sneakers. Her own clothes had been discarded. The door to the bedroom clicked open. A man walked in, holding a silver tray. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, wearing a sharp, 3-piece suit and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like a university professor, not a gangster. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I am Arthur Pendleton," the man said, his voice a soothing, refined baritone. He set the tray down on the nightstand. It held a steaming cup of espresso, a glass of orange juice, and a plate of pastries. "I am Mr. Moretti's chief of staff, for lack of a better term." "Where is he?" Cora asked, pulling the silk sheets up to her chin defensively. "Victor is in the adjacent room. Dr. Harrison successfully extracted a 9mm hollow point from his deltoid in the early hours of the morning. He lost a considerable amount of blood, but he is awake and, predictably, quite furious." Arthur offered a polite, tight-lipped smile. "He asked me to ensure you were comfortable." "My brother!" Cora demanded, ignoring the coffee. "He said he was sending men to the hospital." "And so he did," Arthur nodded, adjusting his glasses. "I have 2 of my most reliable operatives stationed inside room 412, and 2 more in the lobby. Your brother, Leo, is perfectly safe. The nursing staff believes they are private security hired by a wealthy benefactor." Cora let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 8 hours. She slumped back against the pillows, running a hand over her face. "I want to see him. I need to go to the hospital." Arthur's polite smile vanished. "I am afraid that is impossible, Miss Mitchell. You are currently the most wanted woman in Chicago's underworld. Carmine DeLucci lost his best hit squad last night. He knows Victor survived, and he knows a woman matching your description was involved. Stepping outside this penthouse would be a death sentence. So, I'm a prisoner." "You are a highly valued guest," Arthur corrected gently. "Please, get dressed. Victor has requested your presence in the study. We have a rather urgent matter to discuss." 10 minutes later, dressed in the provided clothes, Cora walked down a sprawling hallway lined with modern art and into a massive, mahogany-paneled study. Victor was seated behind a large oak desk. He looked terrible. His skin was pale. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his left arm was heavily bandaged and strapped to his chest in a dark sling. Standing around the desk were Dominic, Arthur, and a younger man with a laptop, typing furiously. The room fell silent as she entered. Dominic gave her a respectful nod, a stark contrast to his aggression in the alley. "Sit," Victor said, gesturing to a leather wingback chair opposite his desk. His voice was tired, but the storm-gray eyes were as sharp as ever. "How did you sleep?" "I didn't," Cora lied, sinking into the leather. "What is happening? Why did those men try to kill you?" "Politics," Victor scoffed, leaning back and wincing. Carmine DeLucci runs the South Side. We run the ports, the unions, and the logistics. 10 years ago, my father brokered a truce with Carmine to stop a street war that was bad for business. Last night, Carmine broke it. Why? Because he knew I was vulnerable, Victor said, his jaw tightening. Rinaldi's is supposed to be neutral ground. No weapons, no hits. It's a sanctuary for our kind of business. I went there with a light detail because I was meeting a city alderman who canceled at the last minute. Cora frowned, her mind racing back to the chaotic events of the previous night. She remembered the restaurant, the sounds, the smells, the people. The alderman didn't cancel by accident, Arthur chimed in, pacing the room. It was a setup. Someone fed Carmine our itinerary, and someone inside Rinaldi's gave the hit squad the layout and the timing. The younger man with the laptop, Simon, looked up. I've scrubbed the burner logs. The encrypted chatter confirms it. Carmine knew exactly which room you were in and that the alderman had bailed. Cora sat up straighter, a sudden, chilling realization dawning on her. Tomas. Victor raised an eyebrow. The manager? Yes, Cora said, her voice growing steady with conviction. Tomas is usually a micromanager. He always handles the VIPs himself. But last night, he was sweating, panicking. He told me to take the wine to the Capri room because Sarah, the usual server, was hyperventilating in the cooler. But Sarah wasn't in the cooler. I saw her leave the building 20 minutes earlier. Dominic swore loudly. That greasy little rat. He cleared the floor and sent the new girl in to take the bullet so he wouldn't get caught in the crossfire. Victor's good hand clenched into a fist, the knuckles turning white. Simon. Find Tomas. Now. I'm already pulling his financials, Simon said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Wait. Boss. I'm pinging a massive wire transfer. 50 grand dropped into his offshore account at 10 p.m. last night from a shell company tied to the DeLucci family. Where is he? Victor demanded. His phone is off, but his car's GPS shows he crossed city limits an hour ago. He's heading toward the private airfield in Gary. Cora flinched at the mention of her hometown. Dominic, Victor said, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with a lethal, icy calm. Take a crew. Intercept him before he gets on a plane. Bring him to the warehouse. He doesn't get to run. On it, Dominic said, turning on his heel and sprinting out of the study. Victor looked back at Cora. You just saved us days of hunting. You have a good memory, Waitress. It's Cora, she said firmly. And I don't want to be involved in this. I just want to make sure my brother is safe. Simon let out a sharp hiss. He stared at his laptop screen, his face draining of color. Boss, we have a problem. What is it? Arthur asked, stepping behind Simon to look at the screen. I've been monitoring the police scanners and the hospital's internal security feeds, Simon stammered. Carmine's men. They didn't just want you dead, boss. They're scrubbing the restaurant's HR files. They know who the waitress is. Cora's heart stopped. Leo. Arthur's men are at the hospital, Victor said, sitting forward, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. They have the floor locked down. It's not just a few guys, Simon said, pulling up a live camera feed on the large monitor on the wall. The screen showed the lobby of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. 4 black SUVs had just pulled up to the emergency entrance. Over a dozen men in heavy coats were spilling out, pushing past the panicked security guards. Carmine sent an army, Simon whispered. They're going for the boy to use him against us. Cora leaped out of her chair, a primal, blinding terror seizing her. No, my brother. You promised. Victor didn't hesitate. He stood up, ripping the IV line out of his arm with a vicious yank. A fresh spot of blood immediately bloomed on his bandages. Arthur, Victor roared, grabbing a fresh pistol from his desk drawer and slamming a magazine home with one hand. Mobilize everyone. Every soldier, every enforcer. We are going to war. He looked at Cora, his gray eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute resolve. I promised you he was under my protection. And a Moretti does not break a vow. The convoy of black, armored Moretti SUVs tore down Lakeshore Drive, a terrifying procession of roaring engines and screeching tires that ignored every red light and traffic law in Chicago. Inside the lead vehicle, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Victor sat beside Cora, his face pale but his jaw set in an immovable line of absolute fury. He was meticulously loading magazines with his one good hand, resting the polymer grips against his knee to slide the 9mm rounds into place. "They have the lobby." Simon's voice crackled over the SUV's encrypted comm system. He was back at the penthouse, tapped into the city's grids. Arthur's men are holding the fourth-floor choke points, but Carmine sent at least 20 shooters. Local law enforcement is being diverted. DeLucci bought off the precinct captain. "They're buying time to extract the boy," Victor growled, tossing a loaded Glock 19 onto Cora's lap. Cora stared at the sleek black weapon. Her hands were shaking again, but the paralyzing fear she had felt in the restaurant was gone, replaced by a white-hot, maternal rage. They were going after Leo, a 17-year-old boy tethered to a dialysis machine. "I know the hospital," Cora said suddenly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the cabin. Dominic, who was driving, glanced back at her. "I've been going there every day for 6 months. The main elevators will be locked down or camped by Carmine's men. But the West Wing has a biohazard disposal elevator that runs from the basement loading dock straight up to the fourth-floor utility closet. It bypasses the main grid." Victor stopped loading his magazines. He looked at her, the ghost of a dangerous smile playing on his lips despite the pain radiating from his shoulder. "Dominic, reroute to the loading dock. We go in quiet." 2 minutes later, the convoy slammed to a halt in the subterranean concrete loading bays of Northwestern Memorial. Victor's enforcers poured out of the vehicles, a synchronized wave of tailored suits and tactical weaponry. 4 men hold the perimeter," Victor ordered, stepping out into the damp, fluorescent-lit basement. He chambered a round in his weapon. "Dominic, take the rest up the main stairs and flank the lobby. Squeeze them. Cora, you're with me." They found the biohazard elevator exactly where Cora said it would be. The ride up was agonizingly slow, the ancient gears grinding loudly. Victor leaned heavily against the steel wall, his breathing ragged. "You shouldn't be on your feet," Cora whispered, gripping the Glock tightly. "I don't break promises, Cora," he replied softly, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. In the claustrophobic space of the elevator, the heavy Mafia boss persona stripped away, leaving only a man fiercely determined to protect what was his. "Nobody touches your blood." The elevator jolted to a halt. The doors slid open to reveal a dimly lit utility closet. Beyond the louvered door, the chaotic sound of gunfire echoed down the pristine white hallways of the 4th floor. Cora pushed the door open slightly. Smoke hung in the air, setting off the sprinkler systems. Water rained down on the linoleum. 50 feet down the hall, outside room 412, 2 of Arthur's men were pinned behind an overturned nurse's station, exchanging fire with 6 of Carmine's heavily armed thugs advancing from the main stairwell. "They're closing in on Leo's room," Cora gasped. Victor didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the closet, stepping perfectly into the blind spot of the advancing hitmen. He raised his weapon. "Hey!" Victor shouted, his voice a commanding boom that echoed over the gunfire. The thugs spun around, their eyes widening in shock as they recognized the man they had supposedly killed hours ago. But before they could aim, Victor fired. His precision was terrifying. 3 suppressed rounds dropped the 3 closest men before they even realized they were dying. The remaining 3 panicked, returning wild, inaccurate fire. Bullets shattered the drywall around Victor. He ducked back, cursing as his injured shoulder slammed against the doorframe. One of the hitmen, a massive brute with a shotgun, charged toward their position, roaring. Cora didn't wait for Victor to recover. She stepped out, her father's training taking over. She planted her feet, aligned her sights, and pulled the trigger twice. The brute stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward as the bullets pierced his chest before crashing into a pile of medical carts. The remaining 2 hitmen, seeing their squad decimated from behind, a brief, brutal exchange of gunfire later, the hallway fell dead silent. Cora didn't wait for the smoke to clear. She sprinted down the waterlogged hallway, slipping on the wet linoleum, and threw open the door to room 412. Leo was huddled in the corner of the room, dragging his IV pole with him, clutching a metal bedpan like a weapon. His face was pale, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "Leo!" Cora cried out, dropping her gun and falling to her knees to pull her brother into a desperate embrace. "Cora? What? What's happening? There was shooting." Leo sobbed, burying his face in her shoulder. "It's over," she whispered, stroking his hair, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "It's over, baby. I've got you." Victor stepped into the doorway, his gun lowered. He looked at the siblings huddled on the floor, the water from the sprinklers soaking his ruined clothes. He watched Cora, the fierce, terrifyingly competent woman who had just killed again to protect her blood, and something fundamental shifted within the cold, guarded heart of the Mafia boss. He gestured to Dominic, who had just appeared in the hallway. "Get a private ambulance. We're moving the kid to the secure compound in Lake Forest. Bring Dr. Harrison. The Mitchells are untouchable now." 48 hours later, the war that had threatened to consume Chicago was over. The retaliation of the Moretti family had been swift, brutal, and absolute. With Leo safely tucked away in a heavily guarded, state-of-the-art medical suite at Victor's sprawling private estate in Lake Forest, the heavy, restrictive chains of caution had finally come off. Dominic had intercepted Tomas at the Gary airfield, and the sweaty, terrified manager had spilled everything before they even had to lay a hand on him. Carmine DeLucci had orchestrated the hit from his stronghold, a massive, fortified meatpacking plant on the south side. Victor hadn't just sent his men to do the job. He went himself. It was a message to the rest of the Chicago underworld. The king was bleeding, but he was far from dead. In a coordinated, overwhelming strike, the Moretti enforcers dismantled DeLucci's operation in under an hour. Carmine DeLucci was found hiding in a meat freezer, begging for a truce. Victor had looked at him, remembered the sheer, primal terror in Cora's eyes at the hospital, and pulled the trigger. Now, the city was holding its breath, quiet and compliant. The remaining syndicates instantly fell back into line, terrified by the sheer ferocity of Victor's survival and his subsequent unmerciful wrath. Back at the lakeshore penthouse, the evening sun cast a golden, melancholy light over the city, turning the skyscrapers into towering silhouettes against the darkening sky. Cora stood alone by the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. She was wearing a midnight blue silk dress that Arthur had discreetly procured for her. The fabric whispered against her skin, feeling alien and entirely too luxurious for a girl whose wardrobe consisted mostly of stained aprons and thrift store sweaters. She held a heavy crystal glass of expensive bourbon, the ice clinking softly against the sides as she swirled the amber liquid, watching the city lights flicker on one by one below her. Her life, as she knew it just 3 days ago, was completely unrecognizable. The suffocating mountain of medical debt had been quietly wiped clean by a nameless shell company the morning before. Her landlord had been paid for the next 5 years. But more importantly, Leo was receiving the best medical care in the world. He wasn't just safe from gunmen, he was safe from the failing healthcare system that had been slowly killing him. The heavy oak doors of the study clicked open, the soft sound pulling Cora from her thoughts. Victor walked in. He was out of the medical sling, though his left arm was still held stiffly by his side. He wore a fresh, perfectly tailored black suit, his tie discarded and the top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and the deep shadows under his eyes spoke of 48 hours with 0 sleep. He looked exhausted, yet the violent storm in his gray eyes had finally settled into a quiet, intense, and unwavering focus. He didn't speak immediately. He walked over to the makeshift mahogany bar in the corner of the room, poured himself 2 fingers of neat scotch, and moved to stand beside her. The silence stretching between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with the shared trauma, the cordite, and the blood of the past 3 days. "Leo's doctor called," Victor said, breaking the quiet. His voice was a low, soothing rumble that vibrated through the quiet room. Cora turned her head, her heart skipping a sudden, erratic beat. "Is he all right? Did his numbers drop?" "No," Victor said softly, turning to fully face her. "They found a donor match." A top-tier kidney transplant specialist is flying in from Boston tonight. He goes into surgery on Thursday morning. Cora closed her eyes, her breath leaving her in a long, shuddering gasp. The glass in her hand trembled. For 6 months, she had carried the crushing weight of her brother's mortality on her shoulders, fighting a losing battle against time and poverty. Now, in an instant, the weight was gone. A profound, overwhelming wave of relief washed over her, so potent it made her knees feel weak. She opened her eyes, looking up at the man who had torn a city apart to keep his word. "I don't know how I can ever repay you, Victor." "You don't owe me anything, Cora," he said, his tone shifting, becoming fiercely serious. He set his glass down on the windowsill. The distance between them felt suddenly electric, charged with an undeniable gravity. "You saved my life in that restaurant. You stepped into a crossfire. You fought by my side in the hospital when you had every reason to run. If anything, I am the one deeply in your debt." Cora shook her head, looking down at the city far below. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do I go back to waitressing? Do I pack up my apartment, pretend none of this happened, and try to forget the sound of a man dying?" Victor reached out. His warm, calloused fingers gently traced the line of her jaw, tilting her chin up so she had to look at him. Cora's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was a sudden, overwhelming, consuming heat. "You can't go back," Victor said softly, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her eyes again with searing intensity. "The underworld knows who you are now. You are the woman who stood beside the devil and didn't blink. You are the one who held the line when my own guards fell. But more than that," he paused, his thumb gently brushing her cheekbone, "I don't want you to go back." "I don't belong in your world, Victor," she argued weakly, though she leaned into his touch. "I'm just a girl from Gary who got lucky with a gun." "You belong wherever you choose to belong," he murmured, stepping closer, entirely closing the gap between them. The intoxicating scent of expensive scotch, rain, and his dark cologne enveloped her senses. "You have a fire in you, Cora, a strength that terrifies my own men. I've spent my whole life surrounded by sycophants, by people who fear me or want to use me for my crown. But you just looked at me, picked up my weapon, and leveled the playing field." He leaned in closer, his lips hovering mere inches from hers. "Stay with me," Victor whispered, his voice a dark, tempting vow. "Let me take care of you. Let me protect your family. Rule this city by my side." Cora looked at the man before her. He was dangerous, ruthless, and steeped in blood. He was the monster in the dark. But he was also fiercely loyal, intensely protective, and the only person in her entire life who had ever truly seen the warrior hiding beneath her apron. He didn't want to save her. He wanted to stand beside her. She didn't hesitate. She reached up, tangling her fingers into the dark hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled him down into a fierce, consuming kiss. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of survival and raw desire. It was a seal on a pact, an absolute surrender to the dark, thrilling new reality she had stepped into. The terrified waitress was gone forever. The queen of the Chicago underworld had finally arrived. The bullet fired in the Capri Room didn't just shatter the silence of an upscale restaurant. It fractured the very foundation of Chicago's underworld. Cora Mitchell, a waitress drowning in debt, forged an empire in a matter of seconds by choosing action over fear. Victor Moretti found not just a savior in the crossfire, but an equal, a woman whose loyalty and lethal instinct matched his own. Their alliance, born in blood and desperation, blossomed into an undeniable, consuming romance that reshaped the city's power dynamics. Carmine DeLucci's arrogance led to his utter ruin, serving as a brutal reminder that the most dangerous threats often come from those deemed invisible. With her brother safe and the syndicates brought to heel, Cora stepped out of the shadows. She no longer served the city's elite. Alongside Victor, she ruled them, proving that survival is the ultimate equalizer.